Got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts to talk Ohio State, Michigan, and set us up for the big game, or the game. Sorry, Stanford Cal, the game, of course, against the Wolverines. So it was Michigan State last week, 52-12. Larry Johnson, the head man on the sidelines for that one. So let's get to the personnel situation. So the offensive line had to be completely reshuffled. We'll get to some of the issues that displayed itself on the field. But in regards to personnel, 4 starters lost, one on defense in Tough Borland, but Josh Proctor, other defensive depth chart significance lost there. Ryan Day, of course, missed the game. 3 more assistant coaches. Do we have any idea what personnel could be available this week?
Short answer, no. Ohio State, they just released they call it a status report, more of an availability report, and listed 23 players that were out for the game. Now, some of that is due to positive COVID tests. Some of that's contact tracing. Some of that may be injuries or other, health-related issues. So no description of why for any of these guys. So we're going to have to wait and see until we get this upcoming weeks to know, okay, who's back. Now, shortly before the game, it was announced, as you mentioned, that there were a few coaches who did not make the trip. Greg Madison, the co-defensive coordinator, and quarterbacks coach Corey Dennis, special teams coordinator Matt Barnes. Those guys weren't there, along with a couple others. So those guys, depending on when they first tested positive, should be back this week, along with Ryan Day. Ryan Day said he would be back on Monday when we talked to him after the game. So I imagine they get that coaching staff. I believe the rule there is 10 days from your first positive test, and you have to be 24 hours without symptoms. It sounded confident that guys would be back. But in terms of the players, we're just going to have to wait and see. I do imagine that there will be a number of guys that get back because, from my understanding, there were quite a few or at least some that were part of that contact tracing and actually never tested positive, but you have to be cautious and whatnot and don't want it to spread because you weren't. So those guys should be back, whoever they are, and we'll get a better sense as the week goes on, I imagine, on that front.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day. Best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers around the nation. Ohio State, Michigan this Saturday. Ohio State 52, Michigan State 12 last Saturday. So, Pat, I believe that the most obvious ramification of the missed personnel was, first of all, from just a unit standpoint, was missing 3 offensive linemen, starting offensive linemen, seeing 3 players make their first collegiate start up front, seeing, because of the shuffling up front, only 1 player in position. And then the way that resulted was we saw, for a team that scored 52 points, most teams would be sabotaged by all the bad snaps that there were because it just typically derails drives. But that obviously is going to be, depending on the personnel that's going to be brought back for the Michigan game, I would think, exhaustively analyzed, scrutinized, and practiced coming up this week in regards to getting that snap of center correct.
For sure. If Josh Myers is the normal starting center, is one of the guys who tested positive, he will again miss this week against Michigan along with anyone else. And I imagine if it was in the offensive line room, and you had so many guys out, but obviously a guy like Wyatt Davis and Harry Miller were able to start. It seems to me that those guys weren't contact tracing, and I'm just assuming here, but probably positive tests. So I would imagine you would see something similar with the offensive line again this week. But yeah, it was quite a adventure early on in that game. And credit to Harry Miller. He did get it figured out for the most part after the first couple of drives. But the real credit goes to Justin Fields for not only catching those snaps and keeping things going, but that touchdown run he had, the first score of the game, was, I think, just a 2-yard touchdown. But he had to do some dancing. Didn't have anything open. The line didn't hold great, and he had to find a way to score. Regardless, some of those other runs too, especially after bad snaps, were really impressive. He was, he's done some really special things as the quarterback at Ohio State. This was one of the more impressive games, and the numbers don't look as outlandish as some of his have. He did have 4 total touchdowns and over 300 total yards, but this was the first time you really saw him use his rushing ability. Not only did he do some of that dancing I mentioned, but putting his shoulder down and running through guys, and being willing to take on that contact when he needed. I think he understood that not only were they missing guys on the field but off the field, and he tried to step up as a leader throughout the week, but wanted to show that lead by example type of thing. And I think he did a great job of that. And credit to the rest of the offensive line. For the most part, there weren't many breakdowns. There were some pressures and things like that. But the running game was effective. Trey Sermon had his best rushing day as a Buckeye with 112 yards and a touchdown. Ohio State ran for 322 yards. So behind an offensive line that had 3 new starters, and some of these guys weren't even expected to play much this year. I didn't mention Paris Johnson, the 5-star freshman who's a backup at tackle, also was out. It was really a group that didn't have a lot of time to prepare, and still found a way to get it done. So that's good news for not only this week, but going forward with some of these guys.
Max Ray in particular has been somebody that's been completely forgotten to a certain extent by the fan base, and he was a highly recruited player by major programs across the country. Didn't get on the field in 18, basically a special teams guy for 4 or 5 games, and really hasn't played games at the offensive line position, but he played extremely well, played this entire game, and just another reason why you bring in all the 4- and 5-star recruits and bring in all that depth, I guess, when you bring in top 3 recruiting classes year after year after year after year. So we see it right there with a guy who's counted upon as a, you would think he would be a starting offensive lineman in college with that high school background as a top 150 player. But here he is at Ohio State, and he fills in against Michigan State and plays that well.
Yeah, and I do think real quick that, as well as they played, this is a Michigan State defense, especially the defensive front, that's still in flux from, what Mark D'Antonio had this team doing a few years ago. So, this wasn't their stiffest challenge by any stretch. Michigan State, it's a Big Ten team, so I think the credit should go there, but only should go as far as that. This wasn't like they weren't playing a top defensive unit type of thing there. So, good experience, certainly good to see them do well, but also I think it's important to remember who the opponent was in this. And it's not someone that you would have come in scared of normally.
And the opponent on the offensive side as well. And we've talked about this in previous weeks since the Indiana torching in the passing game. Okay, how do we evaluate this defensive improvement? Because we expect it to get better because of the excellent coaching and just the talent in the backfield, but how much better is it going to get? How do we rate it? Michigan State doesn't throw the ball well. Rocky Lombardi gets benched. Peyton Thorne comes in, and really the defense, again, it's another example of the points they gave up were meaningless. During meaningful time, they shut out Michigan State. It was 28-0. It was, I believe, got to 35-0.
Yeah, it was really Lombardi, or when Lombardi was in there was no passing game. Thorne at least gave them something. I think he completed his first 10 or 11 passes. Most of those were short. As you mentioned, it was already, it was still late in the first half, but the game seemed pretty much in control at that point. I think the biggest sign of potential improvement was Ohio State turns the ball over. Chris Olave fumbles. Sean Wade then has a pretty ridiculous interception, a diving catch to get the ball right back on the next play. And that was really the first, poorly thrown ball from Thorne. And Sean Wade made sure to capitalize on it, get the ball back. The team goes down and kicks a field goal in the third quarter to extend the lead. So yeah, this was much better from Ohio State defensively. Again, Michigan State, as you mentioned, not the prolific passing attack that some others are, but do have some weapons. And Lombardi, while not great, has shown an ability to throw downfield at times. If he hits on a few of those, maybe we're talking about something different. But they were not able to get anything going, and probably could have had another interception or two in the game with some of his erratic throws. So. This is certainly a feel better situation for Ohio State's secondary, Ohio State's defense as a whole. Once again, very good against the rush. I think only allowed something like 80 rushing yards. Not that Michigan State is good at all running the ball, but you want to keep that up. That's been kind of the bread and butter. So you certainly feel better if you're the secondary after this game, but you have to realize, build on what you did well here, knowing that more difficult opponents are coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, when you size it up that way, a lack of a passing game, really don't run the ball well. They've had defensive issues. I don't know how they won 2 games, but they did against
Top
Michigan.
15 teams.
Yeah, and they beat Northwestern.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Michigan at the time, I mean, we've seen what
Sure.
Michigan is now, but at the time that was looked at as a pretty good win. I think I heard on the radio here locally coming into the game, there are 3 teams in the country that had 2 top 15 wins, and they people. Alabama was one, I forget the second one, and the third one was Michigan State, which was a definite outlier.
No doubt about that. Yes, Mel Tucker has his work cut out for him. 52-12. They're 2-4 right now, Michigan State, with, of course, one regular season game left.